Evelynn Support, or should I say Barrier Evelynn Support. Logically, it makes no sense. An aggressive damage champion, taking the most defensive summoner in the game. But this is Eve is a support, an EUS master player who has invented such a strange new pick, with a new strategy for laning that lets him sustain infinitely, which lets him scale up to use his permanent invisibility to cause chaos in bot lane. This is not a damage support, this is a tilting support, appearing in the enemy's lane, killing them and making them want to leave the game. I interviewed him to find out how this champion can even work in bot lane.
Hey everyone, it's HappyChimeNoises, and this video is sponsored by Touching Grass. Just kidding, this is awful. It's actually sponsored by Porofessor. I'm gonna go back inside.
Porofessor now has off-meta builds from our videos built in. Just download the app, lock in your favourite off-meta pick, and get the build imported right into your in-game shop. No need to tab out. But Porofessor doesn't stop there. It helps you before the game, telling you more about your champion and things you should focus on. It helps you in champ select with automatic rune selection for your champion, and in loading screen you can learn more about enemies to see their main weaknesses. But in game it gets really useful, having summoner spell timers on the UI so you can track enemy cooldowns, and stats analysis both during and after the game so you can see where you need to improve. Porofessor is completely safe to use and Riot know all about it. I've used it for over a year now. Sure, you can climb without Porofessor, but having it is like entering the future. I'd never want to play without it, and the best part is it's completely free. Make sure to download it now from the link in the description and start winning more games. Back to our player. Eve is a support, also known as Lumens. Lumens is from France and he started playing League in Season 2. He actually remembers his first time getting ranked. Bronze 5, 0 LP. Sure, he sucked, but it wasn't all him, as during his first few years of League, he would play on his family's computer. In the family living room, parents' TV on behind him, bad internet, no mousepad, printer taking up half the desk, all while sharing this computer with his two siblings. With the PC barely reaching 20 FPS, it was honestly unplayable, and yet he loved the game anyway and couldn't stop playing. Season 5 was the turning point. He finally convinced his parents that he needed his own computer, and when it arrived, it made League feel like a whole new game. Lumens told his childhood friend about it and how excited he was to start climbing, and his friend told him, "You will never be able to hit gold, you aren't capable." As soon as he heard this, he felt the fire of motivation to prove them wrong. But this season he didn't hit gold, he hit platinum. Season 6 is where he discovered Evelynn. It was love at first game, and he used Jungle Eve to climb to Diamond for the first time. The next few seasons, Lumens did everything right. He played one champion in one role, he was never toxic, he never surrendered winnable games, and he tried his best every single time. And yet he still couldn't climb. He was stuck not just for one season, but for 4 full years in Diamond 5. He kept playing jungle for a little longer, but then in patch 12.13, Evelynn received a huge buff. Not to her damage or her CC, but to her health regen with her passive. Lumens knew exactly what to do. It was time to take Evelynn out of the jungle to a lane. He tried every role, and after some terrible games of top lane Eve, he instead settled on support Evelynn, with good damage, strong sustain to take poke and stay in the lane, and then scaling into a high damage carry. It was the perfect lane. In Season 12 and already in Season 13, he hit master with this style, fully becoming an Eve support main and queuing into pro players like Reckless and Handsammer, with mixed success. The true secret of how Eve support works is in laning phase, not due to her damage, but thanks to her passive. Level 1 Eve takes Q, only buying support item and 1 potion to start the game. Evelynn's passive health regen is the main reason this support works. This is a healing passive that scales based on how much AP you have, so while you're laning, even early on, Eve is healing herself for much more than the average champion. So at the start of every game, he types to his AD carry, "Let the enemy push the first wave. My levels 1 to 5 are going to just be suffering. Don't tilt and wait for level 6, and then we can win easily." So the wave pushes in and Eve plays slowly, occasionally trading, using her Q to proc the support item and get gold. Eve can take a big trade, and it looks like she lost it terribly, but then 20 seconds later, after the regen, she will end up higher health than the enemy, making the trade actually good. Even choosing to tank damage for his AD carry, he knows he can protect them and then regen his health. Because of playing around this regen, he's often very low in lane, and this is where the barrier comes in. It's bizarre to take this on Eve, and so enemies really don't expect it when they're fighting. This is his secret tool to prevent death, often baiting enemies to flash onto him, trading his short cooldown for their 5-minute cooldown, and possibly even a kill. Barrier is one of the most underrated summoners for early fights, and works really well in 2v2s, as well as stopping the enemy jungler from diving him. His other laning tools, the charm and the E-dash, are mainly used in fights, but he can use use Charm as a good defensive ability, placing it on a squishy enemy to scare them away and reduce pressure on his AD carry. Again, his main goal is to reach level 6, so all of his laning leads up to this moment. He's level 5, 1 minion away from gaining his power spike and permanent invisibility, so he does another trick, moving into a bush as a level 5 Eve. The minion dies and enemies don't know he's leveled up. Enemies will still think he's in the bush, but really he's invisible and can find a surprising angle to jump on them. After a super weak early game, enemies don't expect this sudden burst of power, so getting kills here is very likely, and his ultimate is there to safely get the execute. Generally, he now wants to leave bot lane, telling his AD carry to play safe 1 versus 2. Eve's goal is to roam mid and even top lane. You can never really predict an invisible champion ganking you, especially a support going all the way to top. So when it happens, enemies get super frustrated, as they couldn't really have stopped it happening, and they often tilt. And since he's playing support instead of jungle, he doesn't really have anywhere better to be, so he can simply camp in someone's lane and wait for a gank to work. And if random support ganks were not good enough, he still has his barrier to bait people into bad fights, living just that tiny bit longer, regenning, and then turning it around for a kill. But you probably realise there's one problem with this roaming. Your bot lane, leaving an AD carry in a 1 versus 2 sounds like a recipe for disaster. However, it's actually very good for Eve no matter what happens. If the enemies hard push the lane to try and get the tower, then this is just 2 squishy champions with no safety that Eve can easily gank and kill. Alternatively, the enemy can play safe and watch out for Eve, which just gives her AD carry time to scale. It's a win-win. Often in high elo they do play safe and respect the Eve, but this just gives her time to run around the map, getting deep vision control, killing dragons and taking Rift Herald with her jungler, buying his rocket belt to give him extra range for his combo, then buying banshees for safety and making him an even bigger threat. It's hard to even see Eve for long enough to get rid of the shield, and if someone's wasting time trying to pop your banshees, then they probably could be doing something more important. Even though he is a support, he often doesn't sweep that many wards, preferring to hide himself in Fog of War. He prefers to focus on getting lots of wards down, keeping 4 wards from his support item and 2 wards from his trinket. He can always set up vision before fights around objectives, and if enemies try to take vision back, it's very hard because Eve could just one-shot them. Eve herself never really wants to team fight, she prefers assassinating people by themselves, but if you do get in a fight, your job is obviously just to do as much damage as you can, and try and take out someone important. At level 16, Eve support has another new trick, Baron Steals. The ult deals around 1500 damage to low health targets, so even without having smite, it's quite simple to steal objectives. Enemies will be paying attention to your jungler, not to you, and if you do steal it, they'll probably be angry at their own jungler, even if you're doing more damage than his smite. Late game Eve becomes a full carry, having very good scaling. Our player tries to avoid taking huge plays in mid game as he knows he'll always outscale. Eve is a champion that can one-shot anyone late game. You might not even need this full combo. I really struggle to rate this pick, as levels 1 to 5 are usually where the best solo queue champions in bot lane do well, taking over the lane and starting their game plan. Eve support takes a bit longer to start going, but once she does, she is a top support. The champion itself is a solo queue menace, and now freed up to have more time in support. This is the kind of pick that lets you carry games. I could talk about matchups for Eve support, but Lumens wrote an amazing matchup sheet for every support in the game, including specific tips for each matchup, so there is a French and an English version in the description. Most importantly, make sure you ban Kate every game. For his full Eve support build, it's exactly what you expect, just with early Sork shoes for the level 6 roaming, mythic then banshees, or even getting Medjais if you have lots of stacks. His runes are full burst, electrocute with sorcery second for mana sustain, and poke in lane. Lumens has a Twitch and an active YouTube with lots of Eve guides. Link to them both is in the description. And as always, thanks so much for watching.